Excuse me. Oh, perfect. Lisa, when you get the chance, could you let me know if you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. And you are ready. Hey, it's no problem. It's not a problem. So if she's comfortable at the podium,
Yeah.
she can just either stay at the podium or take it off the tabletop, right?
Great. So she can stand here or she can.
No, she can stand right here. But if she wanted to move around,
Yeah,
we could
she
take the
does.
handheld and just walk around with it.
Have slides, but can the camera capture here?
So I'll give it, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
So yeah, I'll put it right on the wide angle now.
So she can walk.
Well, I think I'll probably be more here because I have all my notes.
Wonderful.
So depending on where I am, I guess that's.
Yeah, so you can stay at the podium if you want,
Uh-huh,
but if you decide that you don't want to stay at the podium anymore, just take the mic.
okay,
Don't go past these black tape marks right here.
I got it.
Perfect.
Okay. So. Ellen Marie. Ellen Marie.
So just jabber me, please.
Flip the switch. Perfect. No problem.
So what time in theory do we start?
We usually start like 12:15, but people.
Mhm.
I will. 16 around 16. I will start to introduce you, and then
Okay,
when the people. Hello, everyone, and you're welcome to join today's speaker series. So we are kind of first from our committee point of view is first kind of in-person or hybrid format. And next week, also the same format, and we will have speaker present in person in this auditorium. So welcome to join us next week too. So as usual, if you have questions, I wish you can ask at the end of the presentation. So we have time for the Q&A. So the same set of rules for the other things. So today it's great for us to have to invite the speaker, the Vivien Morris here to present her stories. So Vivien received her undergraduate degree from Harvard University, and also he had a master degree from Framingham State University and another master degree of public health from Boston University. So she's around in this city around us, for many years. And recently, and last year, actually, she also got an honorary public health doctorate from Merrimack College, Merrimack College, right? Congratulations for that. And she is a registered dietitian and public health professionals with extensive works in the Boston area. And she's the founder and the chair of Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition. She is also the founder of the Boston Organization of Nutritionists and Dietitians of Color. And the goal of that organization is to increase the number of African American and Afro-Caribbean nutritionists and dietitians, and to prove the nutrition education in that community. And Vivien has coordinated several community events and activity, and she served on the steer committee of Massachusetts Food System Collaborative, and she has dedicated her talent to strength and improve the quality of life in our community. So without further delay, I gave the podium to Vivien. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for those who are here, both in person and virtually. I'm very happy to be here and to start a discussion with all of you about some things that are really deeply important to me. And I decided to call this presentation Celebrating Culture in the Midst of Food Apartheid. So we're going to talk about all of those things related to that. But let's start off talking about what is the value of food. So I know many of you are nutrition experts, and this is the center of your lives. But let's be clear, it's the center of the life for all plants and animals, right? None of us would exist without food. As humans, food is critical to our physical and our mental health. We all know that foods provide energy and nutrients. They protect us by boosting our immunity. They help pregnant women to have successful pregnancies and to feed their babies. They're so important to the brain development of children. Healthy mood can prevent mood fluctuations and help with symptoms of depression and anxiety. And as some humans have greater access to healthy foods, they're living longer and healthier lives. Let's talk about food and enjoyment. What makes you smile? I love walnuts. Just thinking about them make me smile. I have them for breakfast every day. And I especially like black walnuts. As a child, there were black walnut trees all over the neighborhood that I lived in. And these black walnut trees were, we grab the walnuts from the ground, we grab a hammer, grab a brick, break them open, and eat the walnuts. Those are really good memories for me. And there's a black walnut tree currently at the end of the block where I live in Hyde Park. So I go down and I'm always seeing these black walnuts everywhere. And then I see little squirrels grabbing the black walnuts and bringing them to my yard, right? And eating them right there. So just thinking about the squirrels makes me smile. But what about the taste of food? Is that something that makes you smile? I love many flavors, like varied fruits, apples, mangoes, vegetables like turnips and collard greens. I know they have a little special taste, but I love that. Southern style barbecue and dark chocolate. Yes, I could go on. And I want you all to start thinking about the flavors that you like. And what about food and relaxation? Relaxing when we consume certain foods can be related to many things. The taste can just make you feel good and help you push the stresses of the world behind you. The connection of the food item to your cultural background can help you feel proud of who you are. And the particular memories of eating certain foods in certain locations and with special people can make you take a deep breath and smile. Deep breaths and smiles lead to relaxation. For me, I relax with English breakfast tea. I love having tea gatherings with my friends. Pistachio ice cream and certain types of pistachio ice cream, or even having a glass of red wine. And again, think about it. What foods help you relax? Now I want to say a few words about the value of food and cultural connections. If you're a New Englander, you think about apple picking in the fall, right? If you're from the Caribbean, you have these memories about mangoes and jerk spices. Or say you're from Japan and just the thought of sushi, right? These and others make us smile when we think of them and remember their connections to our families and friends. I'd like to share a bit of the story of okra. In doing this, I'd like to give a shout out to the food historian, Michael Twitty. He's also written about okra. And okra is a plant with edible seed pods. It's biologically a fruit, right? But we think of it as a vegetable. And it's fiber rich, high in vitamin A, high in vitamin C. And it has a lot of antioxidants. One more thing about okra, it has protein. 2 to 3 grams of protein in a cup of okra, which is actually pretty good. As a child, I grew up mostly thinking of okra as a slimy vegetable that I preferred not to eat. And when cooked in certain ways, it really can be slimy, right? And that was my turnoff. Now I understand that the slime or the mucilage in okra has very positive health benefits. It binds to cholesterol in digestion. And it helps remove those things from your gut, right? So it's very helpful. But also when you cook it in a soup or a stew, it actually adds to the thickening, right, of that. And so gives it a really nice, just makes it really nice to eat. But also you can know that if you cook it at high heat, right, or you bake it in the oven, let's say if you slice it and put a little oil on it and bake it, there's almost no slime, right? So now I love okra. Okra is believed to have originated long time ago in Ethiopia. And it spread to Western Africa, later to Asia and India. And in India, they call okra ladyfingers. When slaves were brought from Africa to North and South America and the Caribbean, it was brought on the slave ships with them, both as food and as seeds. Bringing culturally connected food with the slaves was part of the slave owners' plan to keep the slaves healthy enough to ensure that they would give good labor. It also helped with their mental health. They were more likely to want to eat foods that they knew and had positive memories about. So from Louisiana to Maryland, in what was then the pre-United States of America, it was a common dish in the 1700s. It was cooked with onions and tomatoes. It was often served with cornmeal or served with rice. And when they started adding peas to it, the name became changed to Hoppin' John. So I want to talk a little bit about my background and connection to food. So I grew up in a really small town in rural eastern North Carolina. It was a racially segregated town and very racially inequitable. And I thought that was just a definition of my community. Of course, now over time, we all understood that was a description of the larger country. But most of my community members, family, and friends were farmers, growing mostly all of the food that was consumed in their households was grown on their farm in their backyards. And then the rest of the farming was actually for income, growing things like tobacco and cotton. Almost all of these foods, like I said, were cooked at home, and it was the women who did all the cooking. And I didn't even know of a woman that didn't know how to cook. But men had certain skills too. And one of them was cooking barbecue, the Eastern North Carolina barbecue that was cooked in a fire pit. And I was like, oh, so good. Anyway, but certain foods were connected to family, to church, to community gatherings. For example, fried chicken. Now, fried chicken was served at church gatherings, maybe quarterly. This vision that people have, like, oh, that people from the South or Black people, they ate fried chicken all the time. That's not true. It was a special dish for special occasions. Eating watermelon in the backyard, right? Back then, we didn't have seedless watermelons. So you ate in the backyard and you spat out the seeds, right? It was so much fun. Group canning sessions. A lot of times women would get together and do canning together to can that corn that they grew, the beans, the tomatoes, and everything else. Thanksgiving and sweet potato pies. Again, it wasn't until I came to New England that I associated it with pumpkin pies. No, it was sweet potato pies. And as I mentioned, those community gatherings with fire pits, with roasted pork to make our Eastern North Carolina style barbecue. Let me be clear. Okay. So given my happy memories about food, why the term food apartheid rather than food desert? The term food desert has generally been used to describe a location where food is largely unavailable, right? It's a desert. There's very little there. But that's not a true description of many neighborhoods, including Boston's communities of color. There are large amounts of unhealthy food in my neighborhood. There are a large number of liquor stores in our community. There are a larger number of high-calorie fast food restaurants in our community than in others. And we know that these high-calorie fast foods are connected to diet-related diseases. To give an example, of community pushback. There was fast food that was trying to establish itself not far from where we live, right down the street, but in front of a high school. And in applying to get that, the formality that the city needed to have in order for them to move forward with that business, they had to apply, but they also, in indicating how successful they expected to be, talked about the number of students in that high school who would be their potential purchasers. So, and the city gave them permission to open, and now they're there. What is the impact that's going to have on youth? Having more fast food, selling high calorie, high fat, high sugar foods, and targeting youth for sales? It's definitely going to impact the health of youth in our community. So what we don't have in our community are adequate numbers of sources of healthy foods, like full service grocery stores. So we moved to our neighborhood about 35 years ago. Over 40 years ago, when the community was at that point largely a white neighborhood, there were 3 large supermarkets and 2 medium-sized supermarkets in the Mattapan community. Now there is 1 medium-sized grocery store. So this systemic racism that impacts our food environment is best described as food apartheid, not food desert. Because with food apartheid, we're trying to look at the whole food system and how that interacts with race, economics, politics, et cetera, and much more. So let's go back to that word food apartheid. In South Africa, the term apartheid came from the Afrikaans word meaning separateness and was defined as a policy or system of segregation or political, social, and economic discrimination against the non-white majority. Do we see something similar in the US? I would say yes. And can we see that in the food system? I'd also say yes. The term food apartheid is defined as racial food access disparities created and perpetuated by historical patterns of structural racism. So let's look at some of that history. We'll start with some examples from US history, starting with slavery. What is that year? 1619. So the first African slaves were brought to what became the United States in 1619. This meant that they were viewed and treated as property rather than as humans, whose labor, which was largely put into agriculture, provided the basis for US wealth, both in the South and the North. This went on until the Emancipation Proclamation, which was in January 1st of 1863. And for some slaves, that meant emancipation. For many slaves in Texas, they didn't hear about this until June 19th, 1865. That's 2.5 years later. And we call it and celebrate it now as Juneteenth. From slavery, we went to sharecropping. And sharecropping is where Black farmers were still working on white-owned land and with mounting debts to those landowners. And because of that debt, they couldn't legally leave that land. That's still another form of slavery. And from there to chain gangs, where Blacks were arrested and incarcerated for minor or no offenses at all, and sent off to work on both white-owned farms and businesses. Seems like slavery too, doesn't it? And then there's this long history of the mistreatment of farmers of color by other farmers, largely white farmers, but also by the US government, the US Department of Agriculture. So despite the history that I've described, many Blacks wanted to continue farming. Although they didn't get the expected 40 acres and a mule that followed slavery, they pushed forward with farming with the mistreatment that they received by white farmers and the US Department of Agriculture, continuing onward. Over the last 100 years, Black farmers have decreased from 1 million to 45,000. Now less than 2% of all farmers being Black or African American. They lost $326 billion worth of land just during the 1900s. John Boyd, who's president of the National Black Farmers Association, recently filed a lawsuit against the USDA after advocating and pushing and hoping for 30 years for debt relief or loan forgiveness for African American, Native American, Alaskan Natives, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Hispanics, and Latinos. And that got recently rescinded. There was a lawsuit filed against the USDA for considering giving this loan forgiveness to people of color. And it was a lawsuit filed by white farmers, and the judge agreed with them that it would be discriminatory to give US resources to farmers of color. So again, this US Department of Agriculture has been in existence since Abraham Lincoln founded it, right? In 1862. And Black farmers have been discriminated against throughout that whole time period. And right in the middle of the pandemic, when people were about to say, yes, we got something, it was taken away. So we could also spend a lot of time discussing historic and ongoing educational and economic opportunity discrimination against communities of color. But we're going to move on to things that make us happy and proud. We're going to talk about our experiences here in Boston in the Mattapan community and our work to improve access to healthy, affordable food in our community and beyond, looking at a few organizations that I've worked with over many years. Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, Edgewater Neighborhood Association, the Boston Organization of Nutritionists and Dietitians of Color. And also I wanted to share some of the great work being done by the Mass Food System Collaborative. So MFFC, as we call it, Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, which was created in 2006, in an effort to increase access to healthy and affordable food. Our overall goal was to improve the health of the community, and we wanted to focus on healthy food and opportunities for active living. That same year, we decided to open a farmer's market. And that was because, as we said earlier, looking around our community, there was really limited access to healthy food. So that's where we started. We also wanted to offer culturally related foods in our community. And we wanted to support farmers of color. Now, we didn't know when we started there that there were very, very few farmers of color in Massachusetts, but we found them and they've been working with us ever since. Our market is open from July to October every year. On Saturday mornings, we open at 10 a.m. And yet, if you come to Mattapan Square at 7 a.m. in the morning, 3 hours before we're ready to start, you'll see a long line of people waiting to come into the farmer's market. Why? Well, partly it's because the market shoppers appreciate, right, the culturally relevant foods like the okra and the callaloo. Callaloo is a green leafy vegetable that many people from the Caribbean just love. And that these things are grown by local Black farmers, people that they can relate to. But also, I have to say, those long lines have a lot to do with the fact that we've been able to get help from others to offer food coupons. And that allows them to lower the cost of purchasing that food at our farmers market. So our community is high in low-income families and recent immigrants. If you live in Boston, sometimes it's not always as clear that Boston is a very segregated city. In Mattapan, our community is 90% Black and Latino. So, and that many of those people are also recent immigrants, with the second language in our community to English being Haitian Creole. I want to also mention and give a shout out to the youth in our community. A year after we formed the organization, we were asked to do a study to actually get data on the situation in terms of food access in our community. What did people want? What's already there? Also to access the walkability of our community, whether people felt the sidewalks were safe, et cetera. So we brought in a group of youth to just do that data collection for us. And at the end of putting together a very important and useful source of data for us, they said, we want to stay. We want to be part of Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition. So they named themselves the Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition Vigorous Youth. And what they wanted to do was to work on healthy food access and fitness opportunities, but from their own perspective. One of their key food-related projects has been the creation and management of a farm stand in front of the Mattapan Community Health Center. So when the doctors, say the nutritionists and other health professionals, encourage patients to make healthy food choices, locally grown and healthy foods are available right at the door of the health center. And of course, the Mattapan Farmers Market always gives a shout out of appreciation to the Vigorous Youth because they're there each Saturday to help with setting up the market, assisting the farmers, and whatever else is needed. Another thing that they agreed to do was to maintain a community children's garden plot that we built into a local children's playground space. And the Vigorous Youth have been doing that. So mentioning gardens, I want to talk about briefly 2 gardens in the Mattapan community. Mattapan has 4 gardens, and 2 of them MFFC works to support. We all know that growing healthy foods leads to even better intake and allows families to share that food knowledge with children and others. So right after we formed the MFFC, the city reached out to us and asked us if we would reach out to neighbors in the area around Wilson Street to see if neighbors would be interested in turning an empty lot into something else, into a positive green space. And we had multiple meetings, and the neighbors decided that they wanted to place there a community garden. And they also wanted it to be a place where the community members could gather in a positive space. Part of the reason why that neighborhood stood out for us was because a few years before that, 2 years before that, there'd been a very sad incident where 4 residents on Wilson Street, including a small child, were murdered as part of a drug-related robbery that took place. So working to create something positive in that community was just a good thing. and it worked out really well. And when community members started coming to the garden plot, they were saying this was the first time since that horrible incident that they had connected again with people in their community and connected to do something good, growing healthy food and having a very positive space for the kids. I want to mention something about the Kennedy Community Garden. It has its own history as well. It was built by local residents on state-owned land in the Edgewater neighborhood after the state agency that was in charge of that land for years had refused to rebuild and maintain a plot of land that was called the Kennedy Children's Playground. The neighbors felt that they would be able to continue advocacy for the space for the children's playground if they could themselves offer to do something on the land, and that was to create the garden. And it is a beautiful garden. And I hope that you get to come over to the Edgewater neighborhood and see the garden and now see actually the playground, which is eventually redone. So I want to also then share something about another related organization in that same neighborhood, which is the Edgewater Neighborhood Association. So Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition has been doing advocacy work around food and making food accessible. But one of the things that became clearer to us is that we needed to do more deep-rooted community organizing, because we need the people who live in the community to share their views, to learn more about what's going on, and to work on making change. And then through that, all of that, build connections, right? And those connections make power and strength. So that was why we decided that we would work towards building a neighborhood association in Edgewater. And that group now has been going on for going into our 7th year. And we raise issues to the city and beyond related to what are the concerns of neighbors. One of the things we're working on now positively with the Department of Conservation and Recreation is to build a safe and accessible walking path along the Neponset River, but also a healthy food related project that we've done was to take a piece of land that the city offered in our neighborhood, and on that to build a food forest. We call that the Edgewater Food Forest at River Street. And it's again now a beautiful resource in the community. It actually has black walnut trees. Yes. Those black walnut trees have been there forever, and yay. So we're also then now trying to help more neighbors understand and connect with and enjoy the black walnuts, right, that are just there. But it also had just naturally there some other berries that were just growing there that actually are healthy. We planted grapevines, we planted pawpaw trees, we planted pear trees. We have lots of blueberry bushes there. So all kinds of things that are wonderful and that are totally available to everyone. So moving in some ways a little beyond a community garden plot where an individual person or family runs a plot. This is a space that everything, when it's right, is available to everyone. So now I want to mention Bond of Color and its connection to the Mattapan community. So the Bond of Color group is a group that was formed about 25 years ago. A number of us who were then earlier in our careers as nutritionists and dietitians looking around, and there weren't many of us. And we wanted to support more people to get into the field of nutrition. As we connected with each other, you know, we immediately said, what can we do collectively to give to the community all of this knowledge that we now have that we know is so much needed in our community? And so churches would reach out to us and say, can you come to this event? Or community organizations and all kinds of groups. So we've been doing that all over the years. The Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition also wanted MFFC to help with projects because a big thing in our community is increasing the number of people in our community who have the basic cooking skills, as well as the nutrition knowledge to make the right choices and then know how to create it. So at first we were doing in-person cooking classes. Now we've been doing virtual ones for quite a while. But we're trying to expand that out because that's so crucial. And I can just say that, you know, as a pediatric dietitian working for many years at a local hospital, when you ask young mothers in our community anyway, you know, give you a 24-hour recall, whatever, tell me what your family has been eating. Almost none of it is foods that are cooked from scratch, as we call it, right? Your mother might say, I made macaroni and cheese, but it came from a box that I got at the store. And it really is because of those limited cooking skills. So part of the reason that's true, of course, is because for years, there hasn't been training in culinary skills, either in schools or other places. So this is something that we have to address. And that's why I'm going to actually talk a bit also about the Mass Food System Collaborative, because that's a statewide organization that came into being to encourage the state to move forward on all of the goals for improving the food system that came through a process that included hearing the voices of people throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And one of the projects we decided to do was what we're calling the Food System Literacy Program, which is to get state funding so that schools throughout the Commonwealth, grades K to 12, will move to have within their curriculums information and education on agriculture, nutrition, food justice, and culinary skills, right? And again, for those of you who are much older than most of you I see, if you're over, say, 35 years old, you know about home economics. But that was removed from our school system, right, over 20 years ago. So even though they tended to be more the females in the school who took that course, the goal should be, right, that all young people should be taught really crucial information about the food system, including how to cook healthy foods. So where from here? We all need to deepen our understanding of the food system, its history, how it works, as well as the cultures of people around the world who are connected, of course, to the food system. We all need to deepen our commitment to creating an equitable food system and be sure to include the voices and the leadership of those who've been mistreated, whether based on race, gender, age, disability status, or other. This can and should include connecting these efforts with advocacy for policy changes at all levels, whether local, state, federal. And we need to share the stories we've experienced and that we've learned from others and encourage positivity in these difficult times. With that, I say thank you.
Thank you so much for Vivien for the nice presentation. So the question floor is open. If you are here in the auditorium, I encourage you come to the front, use that microphone, or if you really like, I can bring the microphone to you too. But if you are online, please unmute yourself. And if you can turn on your camera and also turn on your camera to ask questions. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, maybe I can kick us off. Thank you so much for that talk. It was amazing. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on your call for action to us, right? So I think we represent almost two communities here. One is the research community, right? We do research. And so what kind of research are you looking for? And what do you think would be most helpful? And in which ways could that be done that would be most helpful? And then second, most of us live in Boston, right? We are neighbors in a very segregated community. What would be your call to action for us as community members in support of all this amazing work that you're doing? Thanks. And there we go. Yes.
So research, of course, is broad, right? I mean, sort of what knowledge would be helpful to everyone who's trying to improve the quality of life, right, of people with a nutrition connection. You know, unfortunately, most people don't know the value of a lot of their cultural foods. There's been a lot of misinformation and, in some ways, put down, I would say, of certain cultural approaches to eating, right? The term soul food, which was a term that was used a lot, I guess, in the 1980s or so. And yet there were things saying, oh, but soul food is so, unhealthy. Like, really? You mean the collard greens, right? And it ended up being like focusing on a certain kind of thing, like saying, oh, but it's all that fried chicken, right? So again, as I was mentioning, right, no, that people weren't eating fried foods as often as it was portrayed. But also that, as I would mention, growing up, people ate a lot of beans as a source of protein. Very healthy, but most people don't know that. So part of it may be certain research, and part of it is sharing the knowledge that you already have more broadly so that people can have greater appreciation for their diets. We also do things like talk a lot about the Mediterranean diet as the best way to eat, right? And clearly there's so many positive things about the diets in Mediterranean countries and Italy, right? Of course, the typical diet in Northern Italy is a little bit different than the typical diet in Southern Italy, right? But no, we won't go there. But great, because we want people who, love those foods that connect to that culture to see the value of certain ones of those foods and eat more of them. Can we do that also for people from Jamaica? Can we do that also for people from North Carolina? Can we do that also for people from Canada or any other place, right? So again, there's so much knowledge. You all have so much knowledge, and we really want you to share it. So what does that mean then for those of you who, you're either living here, maybe you'll live here long term, we hope so. We would love for you to connect more with folks in the community that are trying to make changes. So, but it sort of starts with just becoming a little bit more familiar with other communities. And we can do a better job there of sharing more broadly some of the things that we're doing and inviting you in. And I definitely would love to invite you all to come to the Mattapan community and come to the Edgewater neighborhood in the Mattapan community. But I think it's then hearing the voices of people there who could help give some direction on how your help could be useful. Yes.
Can you wait a second? There is a person online has asked question first. Can you wait a second? There are person online. Maybe she can ask first. I couldn't say her name. Can you? Yeah, go ahead.
This is Alexandra Thorne. Thank you for that beautiful presentation. I want to go to Mattapan now. It sounds like you're doing amazing things. My question is actually about issues around social justice and soils. I don't know if that's something that you've looked into. And honestly, like I have a PhD in biology focused on plants, and I'm still mystified by what foods are and aren't safe if they've been grown in contaminated soils that are, with different kinds of contamination. But I wondered, what work MFFC has been doing, thinking about those kinds of issues, or if you're thinking about them, and what the implications are for a food forest.
No, thank you. We need to understand more. Whether it's the community gardens or the food forest, it's come up often, like, about the safety of the soil. When, say, the city turns over a piece of land and says it can be used for a garden, is that land truly tested? Often it doesn't even get tested before, because if they test it and it's shown that it's not safe, then they couldn't pass it over. So, and they say, well, just make sure it's raised beds. Is that good enough? So we could definitely use some help in understanding more about that. I just want to mention that as a neighborhood association, we're trying to understand more about a lot of environmental things. And so the Edgewater group, night before last, had a meeting with some scientists from Boston University, but to understand more about trees and tree safety. And part of that discussion came up about gas emissions that are throughout the city, throughout the country, right? But the impact that that's having on plants and other things. And for many of us, it was a new concept. We didn't even know, So there's so much for us to learn. And we look forward to maybe connecting with you and others to learn more about what we can and should be doing to ensure that these things that we're growing, we get soils tested and we, send it off to UMass and it comes back and we know it's okay. But I think the level of knowledge needs to be deeper, and we appreciate any help with that.
Hi, it's so great to be in the same room as you. I am so, I just want to say I'm very honored to hear you. I'm a local Bostonian. I was born and raised in Boston. I know of the high school that you're talking about, and that happens so much in Boston. And actually, I am a nutrition and culinary art instructor at a Boston public school. And I love my job. I love my students. And it's really hard to find, to fight. There's a McDonald's right across the street from us. And it's really hard to kind of combat just all the marketing that is strategically for communities of color and for specifically for my students. And so I wanted to ask you, what nutritional educational programs or curriculum do you recommend? Because from what I know and from my time being a nutrition instructor, there aren't too many culturally appropriate and culturally humble programs out there. It's only me researching or me making it as I go. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing and would love to see some of the things that you've created and maybe share that along. We're also working with a grad student at Northeastern on a curriculum that we wanted to use with the Vigorous Youth that's very culture specific. So I would love to talk more with you and share more with you. You know, there aren't that many curriculums that are out there that are posted. I'm sure they exist, right? But how do we get access to them? What we want to do in all of them, you know, is to make them connect, as you know, with the young people that we're working with, right? So that we draw into them both some of that Caribbean history, some of that, you know, the very backgrounds of the families, as well as some of the specifics about the communities that they're living in, because we want to engage them as well in being part of that work towards change, right? Work towards improvement. And I do think the advocacy that we're going to have to do going forward for having our communities being food safe. I'll just share when we were pushing back against the fast food place in my neighborhood, you know, the owner of the company that was putting it there, when people asked him in a community meeting, a public meeting, well, would you have this in your community across from your kids? And he even said no. Right? But he would do it there because it was all about making the money. So we need to work together to push things back, to go forward.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I was a student in a dietetics program in undergrad. I did a whole lot of volunteering with my professor in the community, but I felt that was falling short because the audience was, we were in a conservatory for plants, and we're talking to paid people coming into here. I would say the demographic was like 99% white. And people there already knew how to eat healthfully. I did many events in the zoo. You still have to pay to go there. And I would say the demographic was 50% white, 50% non-white. So I got to interact with a lot more diverse population there. But I just didn't feel like the work was going anywhere because people didn't appreciate what we had to say. My professor and I were nutrition experts. We were not approachable to a certain extent. So, but hearing from what you're saying in Mattapan community, I want to be with you to do the work you are doing. And I feel the synergy coming through your story and Mattapan MFFC. So I want to be in contact and see how I can help.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. So we're going to chat.
Nice. So you can have more work. Other questions? Some in the chat. Okay, there's a person in the chat. Let me click here. There's one question from Mark. And in your great work on community food systems, do you ever feel daunted by national level constraints, either from federal government or national food and agriculture business? If so, what national change would make you work here in the region more successful?
Well, clearly, you know, even though we're working at the local level, we are impacted, right, by the broader, the statewide and the national level. I know that there have been some recent efforts at the federal level to try to have a deeper understanding of food systems and try to make some changes with that. You know, I mean, if you talk about food systems, again, it's a very broad topic, right? In agriculture, we talked a lot about that, you know, the need for more support for creating a very diverse group of farmers and support those existing farmers and helping even more. at the federal level, things like the SNAP program, right? Where very few not the full percentage of all those who are eligible are receiving that benefit, and what more could be done to make that eligible to people across the country. That's a federal level project. And, just also this broader commitment to food equity, right? Which could take place on so many different levels with federal support. So I do also, though, maybe bringing it down a little to the local level, I do want to give a shout out to Mayor Wu here in Boston, who has made one of her priorities to support a more equitable food system in Boston. Easier said than done, right? But at least the appreciation for putting that out there. And then it's going to take the efforts of all of us, including you, right, to help push that forward. So it's a lot to be done.
About the time, 1:15. So thank you so much for your presentation and answer our questions. Really appreciate, and thank you so much for attending this seminar. And just for you to know, next week we're also in person here, and hopefully you come here to join us. Thank you so much.